Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby here with Rose Byrne of Physical and the new series Platonic. Rose, and I think when we think of season two of Physical, a major shift is that inner voice that Sheila carries is constantly growing more aggressive and forceful in this season to the point where she even starts vocalizing things that might have previously stayed in her head. What was it like playing that shift in the character?
I love the inner voice stuff. It's challenging technically because of various things that you can imagine, but and it's also something we often do at the end of the series, like as the final piece of texture of the show of what will come out and what is in. But it felt like a natural progression of her beginning to begin her recovery, her fake recovery before her real recovery, or her more of a successful attempt at recovery at the end. So of season two. And I feel like Annie Wiseman is so specific with how she sort of weaves the inner voice throughout the season of what role it is playing in her mental state and how consuming it is or how much control she has over it, to a very fine detail. So I very much trust her in like how it's going to be sort of pieced out through the show.
Hmm. I talked to Annie a little bit about how the voice is those lines are said aloud on set, which that must be such a gift to you. What does that do? How does that help you with those moments?
Many different ways it helps. I mean, technically, it's just really great to know like the length of time that's there, and I. It's just a great reminder of like technically as a viewer what you will be seeing and how a lot of you don't want to put a hat on a hat. So if you're having all of this incredible dialogue of this overthought, and then there's a sense of just performance wise balancing that tonally. So it's always really helpful. Yeah, my stand-in Kelly does it, and she's incredible. And then we always start laughing afterward because it's so like terrible, like the stuff that she's saying, and we all like everybody's like, "Whoa, who wrote that?"
Is it hard to is it hard then to come back, after the fact in like an ADR booth and recapture the moment? What is that like?
I'm one of those strange beasts or actresses. I don't know who. I love ADR. I feel like you can fix things, and you can. It's such a great technical chance to have another shot at it and change something or see that worked or this didn't. So I enjoy it more and more as I've gotten older, and I really enjoy it for physicals because again, it's such a big part of the performance and part of the show as a whole, and what the show is saying. So it's like one of my favorite parts of doing it is the post production.
Yeah. I also really enjoyed this season. The the new kind of relationship, evolving relationship between her and Danny,
Yeah.
because they're just like hot and cold. She's over him, but then they're back.
Mm,
What was
mm.
it like building that with Rory?
It was really unexpected, Annie sort of pitching this idea of now he's really trying. And what a great thing to like, and it's such a great examination of a marriage of like people changing and trying within like a long relationship of like, give me another chance. And she does. And it's really hard, but he's really trying. And that is so funny to watch, A, because it's Rory Scovel, and also heartbreaking. And then, he can't, he still loses her, which makes it even more tragic. So I was so pleasantly sort of taken aback and surprised by by that part of the story, and felt again the show is so much more. It's such an examination of many things, but also of a marriage and how there's marriages within marriages within marriages.
Certainly.
Mm.
And I think if I had to sum up, like if I had to think of my favorite scene, it is definitely the one with you and Murray Bartlett having like a aerobics battle throughout his mansion. But there's also like really deep confessions within it too.
Yeah, yeah.
Can you just talk about what went into that? Because it seems like tough physical work and emotional work in that scene.
It was sort of a culmination of so many things. It was a really huge beat in the season before she goes to recovery. So it was leading up to this thing and this very sort of not treacherous relationship, but a little bit foreboding, this relationship with this guy and how many secrets he has. And sort of he's such a cautionary tale, Vinnie Green. So that was there's a sense of danger around that character, and then that night it really comes to a head, and you see they just sort of have this like incredible experience together. And I loved all the choreography we did was really, really, really fun and very spontaneous, and very comedic, and like we were trying to find different levels to it, so it wasn't just like a drug-fueled haze, but sort of like and Murray was so funny, and he's just such a mensch.
Yeah, and secrets are kind of Sheila's trade. It's like she carries so much. It's what makes her fascinating, I think, for a viewer, because in every scene it seems like you have an ulterior motive or another thing you're playing under the surface. What does that give you in every moment?
When you have such an addiction and such an illness that, it's so hard to be intimate and close to anyone because it requires vulnerability. That's the opposite of holding on to secrets. So it's such a part of her illness and the disease that you really, for people I've met in recovery or people who are going through EDs, it's like it's very hard to break those patterns, and it's something you have to work at every second of every day because what's the opposite of isolation is connection. What's the opposite of treating yourself like that is like being seen by somebody. So that breaking those moments when she does break it, and why she's so closed off to people, is it's you see bit by bit, like her letting in Greta, Deirdre Friel's character, or her relationship or the affair with John Bream, like the moments she does let people in. But yeah, she's a wildly kind of a wildly complicated character.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned recovery, and this season she does embark on a recovery journey. And I appreciated the way it was it wasn't a linear path. It's very, realistically depicted as quite a hard road for her. What was that like? How did you prepare for that aspect of the story?
I did. It was, I spoke to a bunch of people who were in recovery. I spoke to someone who worked at recovery centers. Annie's always my touchstone for this. She's been very candid about this being based on a lot of her own experiences. So, and then you get to set, and you have to throw it all out the window. And but that episode was sort of like a little movie in unto itself. We were away out of town. We were away for a week, and it felt like very isolated, like the episode was. It felt like that in real life. And we had such a wonderful cast of women, and it was very intimate, and you ended up reflecting and sharing like we did on the show, like offset too. So it was like the first real step that Sheila takes.
Yeah. It's really, I think the end of that season is really satisfying as a viewer, because you watch her take those important steps, and then you watch her also find success. She's had this, like, I think there's a line that she's like, I'm tired of playing defense. And she finally stops playing defense, getting her own business. It sort of feels like she's, to me, becoming like a new character at the end. Did you think of it that way at all?
Oh yeah, we definitely wanted to set it up as this next chapter of her, like, leaving the contract she's on in very dubious ways that she gets out of it, to taking control of her narrative and taking control of her image and her business. And the story is so inspired by so many women of that time who were disillusioned after the feminist movement. The ERA wasn't ratified. There was many things that I think a lot of women felt deflated by at the end of the 70s and the early 80s. Reagan was, nominated as president, and a lot of women found independence through, financial means. And Sheila's truly an example of that, of a pioneer of that. So that's definitely trying to sort of set that up for season 3 at the end of season 2.
Yes, well, we can't wait to see what new things she gets up to in season 3. But in
really,
the meantime,
it's a great season. It was so wild to shoot. It really pushes the boundaries and has a lot of big swings, and I'm excited for people to see it. It's definitely, it's definitely a big one.
I can't wait. Before we get there, though, we have you have a new series, Platonic, which has a much different tone than Physical.
I know, it really does.
Was that a conscious decision of like, I want to switch up, between projects to do something wildly different?
Yes and no. I mean, Platonic had been in the works for 5 years. So like the same time Physical was sort of being discussed, this was being discussed. So it's been around before the pandemic, and it was a question of scheduling, and it just happened to fall where it fell because of everybody's work and life and the pandemic. So it was a crazy experience for me to kind of go from this one set of physical, which is a very specific tone, to then a much more comedy, much more of a hard comedy, akin to, reminiscent of the films that Seth and I have done before, whether it's Spy or Bridesmaids or Knocked Up or obviously the Neighbours movies. And it had been a while since I'd been in that environment, and I was like, whoa, hold on a second, that's right. How do I, I've got to change. It's a different muscle I'm using here.
Yeah, well, I wanted to ask that because, Neighbors at this point, it's, I think, almost 10 years since that film came out. When you walk onto set with Seth, does that feel like a super familiar thing to you, or do you notice a change from those 10 years? Is there anything different?
No, it's very familiar. What was different was just coming from from physical and having to shake that off a bit, which I'm very church and state with work, but often that can take a minute to shake off. And so, obviously Platonic is a much lighter tonally show, and but Seth and I, what was different with us was that we were playing a friends, not a married couple. So there's just subtle things and obvious things that, like, you're not affectionate, you're probably not as kind, you don't have the emotional responsibility you have, like, as much as you would if you're married. And so figuring out the comedy again with that new dynamic was really fun. And actually we had great new opportunities because of that. So that was definitely, we figured that out, as we went along in the show.
Is this a type of set and atmosphere where there's a lot of improvisation, or is it really sticking to the structure?
There is improv. Seth is such a gifted comedic actor, obviously, and he brings so many ideas and fresh ideas, but it's always based in, like, the reality of the show and the scene. And intuitively, how far to go, and you could throw a lot of ideas and then maybe just 1% will get on there. So, but I hadn't done it for a minute, so it took me a minute to remember, because my improv skills are a little bit mercurial at best. So, but we, the show was, Seth and Nick have been friends since they were since Seth was 18, and I got my break in comedy because of Nick Stoller. So there is a history with us, and there's that gift of him being able to really write to us and write to our strengths as a pair.
Well, it's a whole lot of fun to watch from an audience perspective. Certainly, what is it, this style of, flat out comedy, what is the most satisfying aspect of that for you?
It's something I would like to watch. I gravitate toward these kinds of shows myself. I seek them out, and so that I delight in is to be part of something that I myself would really want to see and want to watch. And it lives and dies on the chemistry of these two friends. If that's not there, you don't have a show. You're not going to believe anything that's happening. So without, I think, having Seth come on board, it would have most likely would have been a lot harder to make work. So. And I love buddy movies, whether it's a buddy movie like between two guys or between two girls, but you rarely see a buddy movie with a girl and a guy.
Yeah, it's great to see. Before I let you go, I was thinking about these two women you're playing, and I know you said you have to shake off physical before you started this one, but is there anything that is sort of like a uniting thread? Like, do you think Sheila and Sylvia would get along? Would they hang out? Is there something that would unite those characters?
I would love to see that scene, the two of them hanging out. I feel like they're very different personalities, but I would love to see them have a conversation. That would be extraordinary.
You've already done something with an inner voice, playing that kind of duality. So I think it would be fun to.
It's just an extension of that, really, right? Like, I could do that. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll pitch it to Annie and Seth for a crossover event.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Rose, for chatting with me.
Yeah, thanks so much.
To see you.
Nice to see you.
For everyone watching, subscribe to Gold Derby and keep up with us. Thank you again, Rose.
Thanks so much.